And we are now talking about how good are specific builds in Fractals. We are not splitting this up in 3 separate tier lists. We are sticking to 1 tier list. So I'm talking about the very best builds for the elite spec. Yeah. So that means that I will make a, let's say, a note if, for example, if you can play a quickness catalyst as a DPS or you can play as a healer. I will make a note there, but I will rate the spec as one thing, how good it is in Fractals. Yeah. So where do we start? What makes a very good build for Fractals? So I think power DPS is just very good because Fractals are very short, typically, especially tier 4 Fractals, and not the CMs. They are really short. You just need to burst the boss to go to the next thing. Kill the enemies. Typically, you want to have some AoE as well, and stability helps. Those 3 things is typically what a Fractal is really necessary. You typically don't want to have condi builds that have a high ramp up time. You want to have power builds that have a short burst. There are some exceptions with the CMs. CMs, we will get to that. For example, 99 CM and 98 CM at this moment. So Silent Surf and Sankwa Peak, those 2 are favoring range builds, and typically range builds are condi builds, so that's why you see a lot of people playing condi there. And the phases are also not that frequent, so that means that if you don't lose your conditions that you ramped up. So sometimes condi builds can work, but typically power builds, you will see that in the tier list, will be higher. This is a tier list for Fractals in general, so tier 4 and CMs, whatever. Where do you want to pick this class? So it's always just about Fractals and not really specifically only for tier 4s or only for recommended, only for CMs. No, it's for all of them together. And of course, special shoutouts to all my Patreon, Twitch and YouTube supporters that help me keep the lights on. Thanks a lot. And now let's jump right in. So we will start with the core classes. Everything that I will put in here is playable. Don't get me wrong. You can play every single thing. It's playable. Tier just means it's the worst tier because everything above it is better. That doesn't mean D tier is unplayable. Yeah. Just want to mention that. And that's why I would put Core Mesmer in here, Core Ranger in here. I put, what do I put in there as well? Yeah, probably Core Revenant and Core Elementalist. Yeah, I mean, you should not play D tier builds in Fractals. I would even go as far and I would say if you want to be in a pack group, you would play something B tier or above. You would not go C or D tier. It just means those specs are still playable. So if you have some kind of static and you want to do some kind of troll run, you can still play them and you will perform decently well. You know, it's not like you will be top DPS typically, but it will be working. PvE is designed in a way that everything works if you just understand how you have to do it. So I think Core Warrior you can actually play decently well as some kind of support if you really wanted to, because you can actually provide some kind of healing and I think you can also upkeep permanent quickness. You can play Core Engineer as some kind of DPS build. Core Guardian is actually decent as well as some kind of low intensity build for Core class. Core Thief you can also play as some kind of DPS build. And Core Necromancer is also maybe high D tier, low C tier, but completely honest here, don't play those core classes. It's just horrible. Yeah. If you have expansions, don't play core classes. If you have any expansion and can get any expansion with the, let's say, access to any elite specs, then play the elite specs. They are just straight up better. So just do the really big things out of the way already. Firebrand, easy S tier. It's, if you can play it, if you play a quickness Firebrand as a celestial build or if a full healing Firebrand, if you position yourself correctly, if you know the mechanics, if you do the reflex and stability, it's by far the best healer in terms of just raw utility. Yeah, it can easily pre-stack, it has amazing stability access, it's just really, really good. But, and that's the big problem here. The big problem here is that you have to know how to play the build. It doesn't play itself. It's true for all supports in Guild Wars 2 that none of them actually play themselves, so supports are the hardest roles to fill, so to say. But Firebrand in particular is really hard. You have to understand how to position while doing the mechanics, while doing your boons, while doing your healing. So there's a lot of things involved and you have a lot of buttons to press. It's quite spammy. So Firebrand is just the best option for people that are really hardcore. Because you can also play Celestial and you're actually really nice on DPS side as well. So it's a very good pick there in Fractals. It can be used in any fractal, but you have to be somewhat decent at it. If you are not very decent at it, it goes down into B or even C tier, I would say, because your quickness uptime sucks, your healing sucks. So if you are not positioning correctly, that's really bad. Yeah, maybe you're right, Snowdrop. Maybe I should make some kind of split here and say Chronomancer is a little bit better because it's more flexible. Yes, but I feel like Firebrand pairs perfectly in terms of pre-stacking with another spec. I personally think Renegade is S tier for me as well. Because Renegade and Firebrand just pair together, because those let's say if it was only be one of those existing, I would put both of them in high A tier. But because both of them exist, you can pair them together and the pre-stack is complete. It's perfect. You have perfect alacrity, perfect quickness. You engage the fight. And for some fights, you actually could go 5 DPS. Because you don't need any boons after that. Because the pre-stack is enough to actually have covered the whole fight. So that's why I would put both of them in S tier, because they're absolutely insane. And you typically play Renegade as an alacrity DPS in CMs. You can play it as a Condi build, because you then have some nice ranged option. But in power fights like 97 CM, 96 CM and all the T4 fractals, you would play it as a power build and you have immense burst damage. Your graph looks like a, let's say, a spike that goes really high up and then it drops down very shortly after, let's say, 30 seconds. And your long-term DPS, so your consistent DPS is very bad. That's why you don't see it in raids and strike missions. But in fractals, the burst is really good. And that's why you can play it even as a DPS build without any alacrity, and it's still very good. So this is a very good build. I would say maybe even better than Firebrand if I would do a left to right sorting as well, just because it's more versatile and you can pair it with the next build that I want to mention here, which is Chronomancer. Chronomancer is also S tier. Chronomancer's biggest weakness is that it can't pre-stack wounds that easily, at least quickness or alacrity not perfectly. Why? Because you need to have a target. And that means you can't pre-stack it at the Mistlock Singularity. That doesn't mean it's bad, because you can pre-stack all other boons, which is obviously insane, and you can have permanent stability on this class. For your party as well, you have crazy good CC, you have feedback, you have so much utility, you can swap around whatever you want, and you can play it as a full healer, you can play it as an offensive supporter, you can swap between alacrity or quickness. It's absolutely insane. I'm just listing a few things that Chronomancer can do. I would say it's the most versatile class by far in the game, and that's why it's so good in fractals. Yeah, I would not play it as a pure DPS, then the damage is too low, but you can even play it as a Condi, quickness DPS, Condi, alacrity DPS. Everything works. There is so much that actually is really good on Chronomancer. You can do some pre-stacks, that's correct, Snowdrop, but I would say it requires you to actually be very decent and you have to know how to play your class very well to actually do a pre-stack with the continuum shift. But it feels like it's, in my opinion, it's not, you can't expect the Pack Chronomancer to do that. And I also think it's not really necessary, because you will get the boons in the first second of the fight anyway, if the Chronomancer knows what they're doing. So I feel like, yes, it's a weakness that you can't pre-stack that easily, but it will be good for most of the fights anyway. So how are Firebrand's other roles? So Firebrand, in my opinion, just to go back to that, you play it as a support. You play it as a quickness healer or a quickness sub-healer. So sometimes if you're a really tryhard group, you don't need a full healer, you only go for a celestial healer, that's good enough. And that's where you play it. Typically, there are some really niche scenarios where you can play a full DPS Firebrand with quickness, and you have, so to say, 5 DPS and only 2 offensive supporters. And then you would play it as some kind of power or Condi build, depending on what kind of fractal you're in. But I personally think that's only such a small fraction of the community that actually would do that, that I would say you play it as a healer. That's typically what you play it as. Yeah. Yeah, you can play Condi, Quickness, Firebrand, but like I said, it's very uncommon. Typically, you play a Celestial one or you play a full Harrier or a Minstrel one. That's about it. I think the amount of people that actually would go for offensive Firebrand is very low. Now we start to get into the spicy stuff. So I personally, now I will also put in S tier, I will not only leave those 3 builds. Yeah. Maybe, I'm not sure. The problem is, can I put a DPS build in S tier? Because DPS builds are way more interchangeable than those builds. So, for example, if I put a DPS build here, yes, they might be really good in fractals for DPS, But you could easily put another DPS build in the same group and it would perform really well as well, because you are more reliant on your supports. So maybe I have to put those supports in S+ tier and make another tier that is just S to say, okay, DPS is a little bit worse than support in general. Maybe I have to do that. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Soulbeast. I think Soulbeast, either A or S tier, depending on which kind of group you're in. If you have a really good support like a Firebrand and a Chronomancer that know what they are doing and provide permanent stability, it's easy S tier. You have crazy good burst damage, you can play it as a Condi or power build, and it's absolutely insane how much DPS you can put out. I would say for, let's say, lackluster supports, they don't provide stability or you just can't position yourself perfectly because it's just not working in Fractal. Soulbeast is slower because you need to fully cast your X5 and don't get interrupted, don't get blinded or weakened. So if your supporter is struggling, Soulbeast falls off. But other than that, Soulbeast is absolutely insane how much DPS it can put out. It has such a good burst damage. It reaches, I think, over 80k in the burst. It's crazy. So you will one-shot if you have 3 Soulbeasts or something like that on a power boss. They will phase before they do anything. It's absolutely insane. By the way, if you want to see more tier lists like this or just more Guild Wars 2 content, be sure to subscribe. Now, back to the video. Then we have already mentioned here in chat, we have Dragonhunter, same thing. Dragonhunter, in my opinion, probably together with Soulbeast, the best power build in terms of high-end groups. Yeah, I'm talking about really min-maxing DPS for Fractal speedrun. Yeah, those two would, in a high-end group that is just really going for a really new Fractal record time or something, those two would be the DPS picks because they are so burst heavy. They have a high damage output overall as well. It's just really good. The H is a little bit less reliant on your party because you have less, so to say, animation locks or something. But both of them are really good. And Snowdrop already mentioned this. Scrapper, I would put in S+ tier as well. If you have a very good Scrapper, you have crazy good damage barrier, and you can play it as a quickness DPS. It's extremely strong in terms of just raw utility that it can bring with super speed as well. It's really good. It has less DPS than Soulbeast and Dragonhunter in a perfect scenario, but it's more versatile, and especially in packs and in tier 4 fractals where you just want to move around fast a lot and not only burst the boss, Scrapper gets ahead. And that's why Scrapper is an S+ tier. Yeah. It's actually insane how versatile it is. This is for general fractals, the tier list, Cheeky Monk. Yeah. So that's why I would put it in S tier. It might not be as versatile as a Chronomancer, but it is extremely strong because of the super speed, the barrier, just the ease of use, I would say, and the DPS output. It's just very good. You would play it as a DPS or a quickness DPS. You can play it as a healer as well, but at this point, I have to be honest, I would rather have a quickness Firebrand or a quickness Chronomancer instead, personally. Because they are more flexible, yeah. I would rather have a quick DPS Scrapper with a Alacrity Chronomancer, for example, personally. I would say let's go to Mechanist. I think Mechanist is for me S tier as well. Maybe A tier, depending on, yeah. It's hard to, maybe it's A tier because the damage is lower, of course. The burst damage is way worse than, yeah, it's A tier, I would say. Burst damage is way worse than Dragonhunter and Soulbeast, but it's very easy to play. You can play a ranged rival mech, you can play a Condi mech, with Spear. Both of them are really good right now. Good DPS, quite easy to play. Especially the rival one, extremely easy to play. And you can also play it in the Condi fights, so to say, because you're fully ranged. So why would you go to Condi if you can play power there? Your burst is bad. Don't forget that. The burst is quite bad. But it's a very easy build. So you can make it work even if your supports are not that good, because you can actually position very easily out of range and stuff of dangerous attacks. So for me, it's an A tier build, not S tier. You play it as a DPS. You can also play it as some healer. Wouldn't do that. Typically not that good anymore. But you can also play it as a leg DPS. I think that's a decent pick. And maybe the DPS is again quite low, 33k or something. And the burst is not that good. But you can make it work. That's why it's an A tier. Then let's go for Druid. I think Druid is the first really hard decision. I think Druid I would put into A tier because you can only play it as a support. There is some kind of Condi Druid, yes, but typically you don't play that. You would play a Condi Soulbeast instead. So Druid for me is clearly playable, but it lacks stability, the frequent stability axis that Chronomancer and Firebrand have. And that's why it's only an A tier for me, because it's not that useful. You could see, if you watched my previous, let's say, Fractal run that I just did, we had a Druid as a support. It worked decently well, but we lacked stability in 97 CM, and that was a little bit annoying. But other than that, it worked. I would say Druid, just a very good support. That's why it's an A tier, even though it lacks some kind of really necessary stability outcome. Then let's go to a hot take. I personally think Viva is S tier. Viva is S tier for the same reason that Soulbeast and Dragonhunter are there. Because Viva has amazing burst DPS. One of the highest burst DPSs, and has crazy good AoE. Which is obviously exactly what you want for Fractals. There are only a handful of people that actually play this class. Because it's, so to say, more try-hard, and you have to press a lot of buttons and have to know how to do it. But if you know how to do it, it's extremely strong how much DPS it can put out. I would say it's not an S+ tier for me, for the same reason that Soulbeast and Dragonhunter are not there, because they are just a DPS build that are not that versatile in terms of what they can bring to and provide to the party. But it's a very good one as well. I would put Scourge for the same reason that I put Druid in A tier. I would put Scourge there as well. Scourge works very, let's say, decently well in terms of just raw support that it brings, with alacrity, barrier, cleanses, even healing is decent. But the stability, that's the problem. It lacks stability, and that's why it's typically not used in some kind of power Fractals, because you typically need stability to negate a lot of mechanics. It works okay in tier 4s. It's actually quite good there. But I personally think to put it in S tier, it needed more stability. So A tier as well. Viva is one of the limbo classes. It's either S or uninstalled tier. Yeah, exactly. It's like Firebrand. If you have a very good Viva, it looks like insane. But if you have someone that is not knowing what they are really capable of, then that means they are really bad, and they will get out DPS by the quickness support, for example. Yeah, definitely. Willbender is for me low S tier. Is it? Yeah, I would say so. It's low S tier because it has crazy good burst damage. If you play a power Willbender, you can play it as a Condi Willbender in 100 CM. It's really good there. It's one of the best builds to play there. And you can even play it as an alacrity DPS if you wanted to. It has some forced movement, but it works decently well in Fractals. You get really good resets on your virtues and stuff. So I would say Willbender, worse than those, but still a very worthwhile DPS pick. You can play some heal Willbender if you're really crazy, but at this point I would say why not playing a Chronomancer? Or even some kind of Firebrand Renegade combo. I don't know. I feel like S tier for the DPS and the just very, very strong Condi build in that sense. Power build is also very good, don't forget it. Yeah, that's my take. Maybe it's high A tier. Virtuoso, for me, in Fractals is S tier as well. I would put it in low S tier. It's not, maybe it depends in which kind of group you're using it. If you're in a full tryhard group, Virtuoso is not as good, because you would rather have a DH or a Soulbeast. But if you're playing in some kind of tier 4 pack Fractals, Virtuoso gets really good. Yeah, so keep that in mind. Virtuoso is more dependent on what kind of group you're in. So I'm talking about Power Virtuoso here in particular. I think the Condi Virtuoso build works in Condi Fractals, but it's not that much DPS. In Power Fractals, Power Virtuoso with Spear is extremely strong, but it is less DPS than DH and Soulbeast in an ideal scenario, so I wouldn't pick it in a really tryhard group. But if you lack stability or just in general sustain, Virtuoso gets ahead of those because it has distortion baked in, evades and blocks baked into the kit. It's extremely strong there. Yeah. So I would say the DPS option of the Virtuoso for me personally is higher than Viva and Willbender, for example, because I like to play in packs, and then typically those 4 other builds are not that useful. I would rather have something that has some more agency on its own without a need for support. And like Snowdrop mentions, it's actually also really good because you can provide portals and blinks and that kind of stuff, or reflects easily just by switching one utility skill or something like that. It's really, really good in that case as well, which is obviously something that other classes in S tier can't provide. So definitely deserving S tier for just that. Don't forget, yes, you can use White Mantle Portal Device from Sarah as well in Fractals, so you don't really need to be a Mesmer nowadays to port allies, but having the option to easily do so with a blink and just having 2 portals for whatever reason, and maybe like Swampland, it can be really good or something like that. So yes, there are actually valid reasons to put it here in S tier. I think Vindicator for me is an A tier build. Yeah, probably high A tier. They buffed the damage. The damage is actually quite good. But if you play a really good Vindicator, you could probably play an S tier build and you would be even better. I think Vindicator is really strong as a power DPS, and that's about it. That's the only thing that you can play on a Vindicator. You don't have any CC in your kit, or in your rotation at least, and you can't really easily swap to CC either. So I would say for me, high A tier for the high DPS output as a power DPS, really nice. You can't play it in a Condi fight because you're fully melee, and yeah, typically I would say high A tier just for the high DPS and power fractals, but not as good as the S tier builds. We already have the question here from Yusuf. What's your opinion on heal Catalyst? Let's go to Catalyst then. So Catalyst, there are 2 options for Catalyst. Or rather, I would actually say there are 3 options what you could do. You could play Catalyst as a full DPS. Yeah. Catalyst as a full DPS, I would say, is somewhat similar to a Viva, a little bit worse, in my opinion, because Viva has a bit more damage than Catalyst in Fractals, I would say. If you play it as a quick DPS, it's extremely strong. You saw how I actually out DPS today on quick Catalyst my Reaper, because it's absolutely insane how much damage you can put out. The heal Catalyst build is very underrated how good it is. However, it lacks stability uptime, or frequent stability uptime, like a Druid, like a Scourge. So it's not as good as, for example, a Firebrand or a Chronomancer if you need stability. But if you're only doing tier 4s and not doing CMs, heal quickness Catalyst is actually really good. So keep that in mind, yeah. So I personally would say heal Catalyst is in Fractals actually underrated, especially in tier 4s. But is it enough to put it in S tier? No, I wouldn't say so. For me, yeah, maybe I would say high A tier for that reason. Don't get me wrong, it's a really good build. Heal Catalyst is really good. And it's also really fun to play, but the healing output is it's a passive, and that can be not that good if you want to burst heal and stuff, and you can't pre-stack. That's a big problem as well, very good point. So I would put it in A tier. High A tier because the DPS is really high, and that helps it. I would rather have a quick Catalyst than a Alacrity mech in my group, I would say, even though the mech can pre-stack. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Might be different for others. In general, I would say healing quick Catalyst, not in Fractals, I would say is a really good build. It's really, really underrated, especially in raids and strike missions. It's really, really good. Yeah, Daredevil has a lot of CC and has decent damage. Would I rather have it than the S tier builds? No, not at all. Low A tier for me. It's a build that you just pick for DPS and some nice CC. Is it bringing anything else? Not really. It's fast. You can move fast and skip stuff fast, so that's good. It's more a dungeon pick than a fractal pick, rather. If you want to do a lot of skips, you take a Daredevil, but typically you can even do that with the Virtuoso at some point if you just use Mimic and Blink. I think it's decent, but it's not crazy good. That's why it's an A tier. I personally think it's a good pick if you play Thief. I think it's one of the best picks for Power Thief in Fractals. Specter is a Condi build. You can't play Specter as a power build. You can play it as a support, but I wouldn't play support Specter in Fractals. That's just not really that good. Yeah. I would say the Alacrity DPS Specter with Condis or just DPS Specter in general is quite good. It's actually really underrated how good it is, especially in the Condi fights. That's why I would put it in low S tier. But if you just look at the tier 4 Fractals, I would put it in A tier because you don't play it there. You're Condi build, so you fall off drastically if there are burst phases only. So that's why it's an A tier, because it's working really well in the ranged fights, like in 99 CM, 98 CM. There it works extremely well. So Silent Surf and Sanqua. But in the power fights, it's just not that good. That's why it's in A tier. Yeah, for that reason. It's just not as flexible. You would typically play a Specter in those fights that I just mentioned and swap to a power build like a Daredevil or the Deadeye if you want to stick to Thief in the upcoming Fractals then. That's how I would do it. Now we talk about Deadeye. I think Deadeye is so hard to rate because Deadeye has 2 variations of builds. Either you go for a full tryhard build that reaches one of the highest benchmarks, a power build with Rival, or you go for a quickness DPS Deadeye build rather, and you deal some nice damage. You can't pre-stack, you are very lackluster in utility as well, so that's why it's an A tier for me. It's not as broken, but you can make it work. It's really nice DPS. You can also, and that's the important part to mention here, you can go for full low intensity build as well. So that means you go for unload Deadeye, and you can either provide quickness or go for a DPS build, and you have ranged with 30k DPS, and you don't even have to press any buttons for the most part. It's really, really good. So if you are starting out, that can be a really good pick. But I'm talking here about a meta pick that you want to go somewhat tryhard in Fractals, then I would say even there, Deadeye is not my top pick for quickness application. No. And also for DPS, I would rather go with the Soulbeast or the H. It can work, but it's not crazy. Yeah, that's a good point. I did not mention that. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. The AoE of Deadeye is horrible. Yeah, that's true. If I take that into consideration, it's in B tier. Yeah. The AoE is almost non-existent. Yeah. In Fractal, you need AoE. Yeah, good point. I forgot totally about that. So B tier it is. It's not bad on a single target boss. It's actually quite good. But Fractals are not only about bosses, especially if you play tier 4 Fractals and not the CMs. You have always some kind of AoE events, and then you don't deal any damage anymore because you need the malicious thing, the malice to be up on the boss. That's just very necessary. Reaper is a very classic power DPS pick. You can play it as a Condi Reaper as well. I would rather play as a power Reaper though. It's just very, very good there. It has a lot of CC, a lot of tankiness. It's not as broken as a Soulbeast or Dragonhunter, but I think for the average group, I would put it in S tier, in low S tier. For the average tier 4 group, it's actually a decent, very decent pick because you're just very self-sufficient. If you play it in a tryhard group, it falls off because those two are just, or those three rather, are just better. It depends in which kind of composition you use it. I would say if you have a bad healer and stuff, I would really like to be a Reaper because you're just a little bit more tanky and safe. But if you are in a decent group, it is A tier, high A tier only, because you just are a little bit less in DPS, and you are also not that flexible in terms of what you can provide. So for example, you can't teleport your group or can't do reflects or stuff. So I would say high A tier is actually quite fair. You can't play Harbinger as a healer, not really working. So you can play it as a full DPS build, either power or quickness, power or Condi. Both of them work very well. You can play it as a quickness build, power or Condi again. It's really, really good, but it's quite aggressive. So it's a really aggressive pick. I would put it in S tier because of that, because tryhard groups run that really frequently in the ranged Fractals in CMs, because it's a very nice pick there in terms of just raw damage output while being able to do it at range for the most part. You can't provide boons at range for the most part, but you can provide damage from range. So I would say it's low S tier for that. But if you are watching this video as a player that is somewhat new or not that tryhard in Fractals, I would say it falls in A tier. Yeah. So again, it's like Reaper a little bit, depending on the group composition. I personally really like to have a really crazy good DPS harp in my group, because I know this person actually knows very much how to play it. It's quite likely. But if you're new, I would rather go for a Reaper. Yeah, so it's for me, again, very hard to say where to put it. I will leave it for now in S tier, because it's just insane how much damage you can do, even on a quickness DPS build. Yeah, it's again, like Snowdrop mentions here, it's either people know what they're doing and you will be top DPS, or people just don't know what they're doing at all and you will have no quickness or no DPS. So it's like, I will rate it in a, let's say, in a perfect world, or when the person actually knows what they are doing. So I will rate it in this regard in S tier, like with Firebrand, because if I just rated like a bad Firebrand, it had to be in B tier or something. Tempest is really weird. Tempest, how can I put that in words? So Tempest is like a decent support in raids and fractals, raids and strike missions as a full alacrity healer. It's actually quite decent there. But I would never want to have a alacrity Tempest in fractals, because it's just very, I don't know, it feels like you can pre-stack, but your stability uptime is quite infrequent for the most part. You are not that, flexible. You have quite nice utilities that you can play as the only elementalist spec, but just don't play it. Typically, I want to have alacrity Chronomancer and it's better. It's just subpar to that. In terms of DPS, it's actually quite decent, but sadly the Scepter build got nerfed, so it's not that good anymore. You can play a decent alacrity Tempest as well. I think Tempest is very flexible. It's just not as good. I would put it in A tier, personally. Yeah, I think Tempest is for me an A tier pick. You can play it with every single role, but it's just not as broken as for example, Viva DPS. I'm a little bit struggling to rate those classes that are left because they are really dependent on who plays them. So I would say Untamed is decent. I would put Untamed in A tier as well. I think Untamed is, you can play it as a quick DPS or DPS power build. They are quite decent. They have decent burst as well. But I would rather play a Soulbeast because you have the same issue with the X5, but your burst is a little bit lower than a Soulbeast. So I would rather have a Soulbeast than an Untamed. If you go completely crazy, you can go Untamed healer, but you have a big problem there with the stability access. So don't do that in Fractals. So I would say Untamed A tier if you play a DPS or quickness DPS Untamed. You can see A tiers where I put all the classes that are quite decent, but not as good as the S tier builds or S plus tier builds. Bladesworn is insane. If you look at people like Kyoshi or someone that actually knows how to play Bladesworn and Fractals, they are top DPS. They are insane how much you can do if you know how to face him. But if you don't understand how the boss works, or if you're not perfectly executing it, it falls off so hard that it goes into B tier. Yeah. But if you know how to do it, I would actually put it in S tier. Yeah. If you play an Alacrity Bladesworn or maybe high A tier, yeah, it's actually crazy how much DPS they can push out. It's perfect because they have crazy bursts with 1 or 2 attacks very rapidly with the Dragon Trigger and provide also boons if they want to. So it's really dependent on who you ask. So I think maybe we have to make a new tier for those builds and say for good players only or something, because I can't recommend Bladesworn to the average Fractal T4 player. You will not perform well on it. Yeah, I think that's where I would put Bladesworn. You should not play that in packs. You will not typically perform well with it. Yeah. Yeah, you could make an argument for A- or B+, but I feel like it wouldn't really make it fair, because people that really know how to use it would make it look like an S tier build. Yeah, so it's really good. But if you put it into S tier, people would try it out in tier 4 Fractals and completely suck at it, and it will look like a C tier build. Yeah, so it's really hard. Okay, what else do we have like that? It's Mirage. Mirage, don't play it as, let's say, Staff Mirage. I'm talking about full DPS, Power Mirage or Conny Mirage. Those are insane. They are absolutely crazy in terms of damage. They are the Conny Mirage build, if you can play that. I think there are 5 people in the game, like Ryan and Feint, those people that know how to play Mirage in the Conny fights. They absolutely destroy. They have 45k, 46k, like on the benchmark in these fights. It's actually crazy. It's absolutely insane. But don't do that in packs. Or if you do it in packs, know what you are getting yourself into. So this is really it's just here because it's really good in some people's hands, but the average Fractal gamer, don't play it. Even if you want to go for some kind of Alacrity staff support, don't play it. Please don't try it, because you will probably not achieve the skill level that is required to actually out DPS let's say a decent power Virtuoso, for example. Herald DPS got nerfed so much that it's really like, don't play it as a quickness DPS or any DPS build anymore. You can play it as a healer, but at this point you are so inflexible that I personally don't really like to see that. So I personally don't like to have a Herald in my crew. I feel like for me it's a B tier build. It works decently well in strike missions and raid fights, because you are actually providing a lot of value with your boons, with your just general usefulness, with all your boon extension and stuff. But in Fractals, you want to have DPS. You want to have DPS as a quick DPS, and this one doesn't do that, even on a Condi build, really. A quick heal is worse than quick DPS anyway, that's correct. I feel like it's not made for being a really decent healer, at least in Fractals. So for me, it's a B tier build. It works, but I personally don't like it. Okay, what else do we have? Then we have Berserker. This is, again, I don't see a lot of Berserkers in Fractals, and there is a reason for that. Because it needs a target to apply quickness, so that means you can't pre-stack. You are extremely button mashy, but it's really fun to play if you know what you're doing. It has crazy good damage for a quickness DPS build. I would personally say, if you know what you're doing, it's an S tier build or an A tier build. High A tier build, probably. But not a lot of people actually know how to play this correctly, because it's actually really, really spammy. So maybe it's, again, not in packs. Maybe. I think maybe it's fair to put it in A tier. I think in A tier it's actually okay. I think you can play it in packs as well. It's not as let's say, as crazy difficult as a Bladesworn or Mirage. It's you can make it work. It has a Condi build as well. Is that good? Yeah, I mean it's okay, but you shouldn't typically play it in Condi in ranged fights anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's an A-tier build for me. I think Spellbreaker, DPS Spellbreaker is fully melee, but has crazy good power damage and decent burst. I mean, it's a power build. It doesn't have the craziest burst like a Soulbeast or DH, but it's decent as well. So I would say for me A-tier. High A-tier. It has crazy good CC as well, if you want to. And overall, I think it's actually quite a flexible DPS because you are quite sustained on yourself with the full counter as well. I think it's not as broken as the S-tier builds, but it's definitely working in A-tier as well. I think I would rather have a Spellbreaker than a Quickness DPS Berserker, personally. Condi Holosmith, don't play it. That's a D-tier build, don't play it, because Condi Holosmith is so much harder to play than a Condi Mechanist. Why are you actually doing it? I think the Power Holosmith is actually decent, but I would rather have a Scrapper. So typically Holosmith for me is A-tier, I would say. You can play it, and people that do are actually performing decently well on it typically, but it's just so much less sustained than Scrapper that why would you actually do that, you know? And I think a good point by Snowdrop there, actually the stability application of Spellbreaker is actually quite decent. Maybe there is an argument for putting in an S tier just because of that. If your party, the supports are not really providing a lot of quickness, you can do for yourself at least provide some stability rather, sorry, and you will be fine. And don't forget that if you play Power Chronomancer, you have the best Boonstrip in the game. Nothing comes close. You have so much CC and Boonstrip with it that you actually, no pain, no gain is not even there. Yeah. So if that happens, that's a really big issue for example, Scrapper can strip with the Mine. Renegade can strip if it really swaps to, for example, to Absorption Sigil or Malex, but Chronomancer has it baseline in the kit. And you have so many CCs in the kit I'm not talking about the heal Chronomancer, but I'm talking about DPS Chronomancer. It's baseline in the kit. Every CC removes 2 wounds. It's really good. So that's really underestimated when no pain, no gain, and you have a Chronomancer really, really strong. And I think that's where I would leave it actually. I'm quite happy with this tier list. Would you make some major changes here? Do you have any comments on that? But I think overall this is quite a good tier list, I would say. I hope I put it objectively in the right place. But I feel like it's quite nice, yeah. I hope you enjoyed this tier list. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks to all my supporters on YouTube, Twitch, and Patreon. Really appreciate your help to keep my lights on, and I hope to see you all in the next video.